In any business, any team, setting goals is fundamental. We have all been taught to use powerful frameworks like OKRs and KPIs and SMART goals, which I always hated in my life. Tools designed to give us clarity, alignment, and a clear path to success. But what if that path is actually leading us astray? What if the very systems we use to measure performance are the reason our teams feel set up for failure? Why does the process often feel less like a compass guiding us forward and more like a high stakes exam where we are all cramming for? If you have ever seen innovation grind to a halt under the pressure of hitting a specific metric or witness the frantic scramble to show it's working rather than actually learning what works, then you have experienced that the dark side of goal setting. Our guest today is here to challenge this entire paradigm. Radhika Dutt is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Radical Product Thinking, the new mindset for innovating smarter. She argues that our obsession with traditional performance measurement is deeply flawed and is actively damaging our products and our culture. In fact, I would say that Radhika, you have a little bit broken my old dreams that OKR what a wonderful thing, but you made me think, where did I fail in the past? And I get you. I get you. So, everybody, so if you are ready to rethink how your team measures success, you are in the right place. Radhika, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I love that you're excited about challenging this paradigm.
I am. I am. In fact, I'm always get excited when we are challenging the things that we always think are the right thing to do. And this is good because I have the impression that we have so many things that we have done wrong in the past, and now it seems like natural to evolve. And this is why we are here in the Growth Hacking Culture podcast to growth hack the current stupid way of doing things like in the past. Now,
Exactly. There is no growth without questioning, right? And one thing that I've realized is we haven't questioned this paradigm of goal setting since the 1940s. Can you believe it? 1940s.
I- I'm not astonished, really. To tell you the truth, things take time in the corporate world to change. I still remember the thoughts that there was like just 10 years ago about leadership, and now everything is upside down, is changing drastically. And even the things about setting goals, I remember how much people were repeating again and again SMART goals. And that was 10 years ago even when OKRs were in the premium of their lives because everybody was positive, hopeful that finally we are going to reach things because they are more inspiring. But things haven't changed, right?
Exactly, they haven't. But you know what you point to just now with SMART goals, OKRs, etc. One of the key things that I realized is it always seemed like, oh, this is a new thing, SMART goals. Now it's a new thing called OKRs. And if you actually look at it, it turns out it's not new after all. So OKRs seemed like it's a new thing because John Doerr, the billionaire VC, he evangelized them in 2018 with his book, Measure What Matters. And Larry Page from Google, at the time said, this is the secret to Google's success. So you think OKRs are new. But actually, it turns out that OKRs came from Andy Grove, who was Intel's third CEO. So back in the late 1970s and 1980s, he had instituted OKRs at Intel. So it's not a new idea at all. And then you look at Andy Grove and you say, where did he get OKRs from? And it turns out that it was just a small tweak to management by objectives by Peter Drucker
Yeah.
from the 1940s. And that's what I meant, that it's the same idea that's relabeled and repackaged to make it sound new, right? But one thing that in questioning all of this, I had to go back to look at Peter Drucker's work and say, wait a minute, why did he come up with goal setting as the solution to managing the workforce. Why goal setting? Why not something else, right? And the answer to that is fascinating because the problem he was solving at the time was that it was General Motors that he was working with. And General Motors' workforce at the time was primarily unskilled, working on assembly lines with little automation. And in that case, in that sort of an assembly line setting, you can easily tell, who's a better performer because, Andy here installed 45 tires, whereas Bob installed 40, and you say, aha, Andy's a better performer,
Mm.
right? And at the time, it was revolutionary to say, let's set goals together with Andy and Bob, and then you can measure them by what you agree on, as opposed to a command and control, which is what General Motors were doing. So, revolutionary ideas for the 1940s. But now you take those same ideas and you say, aha, I'm going to use goal setting on a manufacturing floor. And you take a complex problem like Boeing and you say, you'll measure people by how fast they're meeting production targets. And that's where you see the sort of quality issues you have at Boeing, where panels are flying off of planes, right? You this way of measuring performance with goals does not work when you're talking about a complex problem. It works well if you're talking about a simple problem where there's one right solution. There's one right way to install tires. I can tell who's a good performer. If I'm solving a puzzle, a complex problem, it turns out that research says that it's not effective to set goals and targets. It's actually more effective to say, do your best. And that sounds downright scary, which is why, by the way, I've implemented a new approach that I use with companies. But that's a lot in there. I'll pause there. I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions.
You made me think about performance. Of course, um, I mean, if we had to reinvent how we assess performance, let's talk about individual performance, not business performance such. Ivan, how have you been in doing your job? Um, you mentioned that it's related to complexity. And obviously, if I need to be assessed in a different manner, that means also that there is going to be more time invested to understand the context of how I did my best, as you mentioned, my best, but somebody needs to know that. What was my context? Maybe it was so super easy. It took me 4 hours to do something during the year, and I'm the magnificent winner of the team. So it takes time and effort, and maybe that's why people are refusing to evolve the way things are measured, because it's simpler to say to take a number, and you don't care about the rest. It-
There's so much to unpack in what you said. You're right. One of the reasons OKRs or goal setting feels so alluring is because of the simplicity it promises. I can evaluate you saying, did you or didn't you hit this goal? Yes, no, simple. And in fact, that's how John Doerr talks about it. Yay, it's so simple. But here's the reality. Measuring performance isn't that simple when it comes to complex problem solving because of so many reasons. But even before I get to that, right? Like, how do you measure how well someone is solving a problem? Especially because solving that problem might take a long time. If you're just measuring them by some numbers, you're seeing the short-term outcomes, but not necessarily whether they're actually solving the problem, which is what leads to what I call performance theater, right? So one of the problems with goal setting is you set a goal or a target, and the incentive that you create is it makes someone show you the good numbers. It makes someone show you numbers saying, ta-da, look, I hit what you wanted me to. And what's happening underneath is even subconsciously, even if it's not malicious, right? What happens is it makes me look at only the good results because I have a bias in my head that I want to prove that it's working. What you really want from me, if you set a target, what you want from your frontline employees is to look at the bad numbers and to actually play detective and say, I wonder what just happened there. What's going on? Is that a problem? Is that an opportunity? What would I do about it? That's what you actually want out of your frontline employees. Whereas that muscle for looking at bad numbers and playing detective at solving that puzzle, that atrophies when you set a target.
Hmm. Now you you made me think about something that you have mentioned in one of your talks. Because I remember that I watched one of your talks and you said it in a provocative way that adoption of OKR is a religion. And now I see what you mean. In fact, it's almost like saying I'm a good, I don't know, Christian because I follow the Ten Commandments and that's it. And I don't care about the context of everything shitty that I've done in my life. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this OKR as a religion, this adoption of OKRs about as a religion. Can you elaborate on what you mean and why you think it is dangerous? Is a dangerous way to approach goal setting.
It's a religion because, I love what you described. It's a religion for so many reasons. I think you're absolutely right. It feels more like, I'm good because I'm a good Christian. I've done these things. I go to church every Sunday,
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
but you're not thinking about, what all you've done to get to church. On a Sunday or in the week prior, right? Like, this is where a lot of people will say to me, how do I spin these numbers for management? Right? We want to show those numbers. How can I look good for church on a Sunday is kind of, the question that's coming up. The other reason I say it's like a religion is because religion is something where you don't question it. You take it as gospel that this is the right way to do it. And this is what I see of OKRs. Every time you have every little bit of doubt that pops up in your mind and you say, this isn't working for me. And if you ever talk out loud about it, people label you a heretic and they say, ugh, if you're saying OKRs aren't working for you, it's because you're doing them wrong. You're
Mm.
just, not reading the Bible properly. And that's the other reason it's like a religion. It took me a long time to actually see the problems with OKRs because I bought into this sort of critique. I bought into people saying, well, if OKRs aren't working for you, you're doing them wrong. The goals you're setting, they're just not aspirational enough. One problem would be you set goals at the beginning of the year, OKRs at the beginning of the year, and then, you realize things have evolved and you're still chasing those numbers where you realize those are the wrong numbers now to chase. And to which people will say, oh, well, that's easy. Just set OKRs more often. You do it every quarter. You don't just do it once a year. And, I've actually heard this being said to an executive, and they laughed out loud at the solution because they were like, well, right now it takes us weeks to go through the process and coordinate OKRs across all the different departments. We would just die if I had to do this every quarter.
That's crazy. But it is the reality. If I have to pick certain things that you have mentioned, is that OKRs or goal settings can be dangerous in terms of sustainability of the solution because we are going to look for the short-term gains and not something that after the judging day, which is the performance appraisal, I don't give a shit about what happens. That's one. If we compare again with the analogy of religion, is the lack of accountability. It's not because I follow the Ten Commandments and I go to church that I'm a good Christian. If I am doing something stupid without accountability, because it's not my duty, it's not written. Uh, and I guess the third point that I have picked is about the dangers of critical thinking. That means that I would care only about that specific thing that I have to do, reach, and I would not care about the other things because maybe it's going to fall in my lap. If I say this is not working, then Ivan, go and do it.
Exactly. Oh, so much of what you said, I want to unpack here. Your second point, right? About accountability. Isn't that so interesting that People talk about goal setting and OKRs as a way of creating accountability. And that's exactly what goes away with OKRs. We don't end up taking accountability or actual real ownership, right? What you want someone to do uh, between point number two and point number three that you made, which is like, yeah, I don't want to tell you what's not working because that might just fall on my lap. This is all about accountability and ownership. What you really want is for people to take accountability, take ownership of solving the puzzle. And, for passionate people, by the way, that is what is actually exciting about their work, right? When you see actual high performers and people who love their work, people who are passionate, they like taking ownership. They feel like when it comes to OKRs, the work it forces them to do is one, the work to show you the metrics that you've set. So that's not the real work, that's the performance theater. And then two, if I care about my work, there's a second level of actual work that I think is right for the company that I'm doing on top of the shitty work of having to show you metrics, right? And so it's double work and it's actually demotivating. And I want to go back to the very first thing that you brought up at the beginning of this podcast, where you talked about we tend to judge individual performance.
Hmm.
What we don't judge is the actual end results of group performance. So the experiment that I want to tell you about is the super chicken experiment that that I have found fascinating. So the parallel that you would draw between how we pick out individual performers is very similar to the super chicken experiment, where they looked at chickens in various cages and they picked out the best individual performers, meaning the highest egg laying hens from all the different cages, and they put them together in one cage, right? So the highest individual egg laying performers. And the control or the second comparison that they made was to taking the highest performing cage. So the highest performing cage versus the individual performers all grouped into one cage, and then seeing how did those two cages evolve over time. And what they found was 2 or 3 generations later, it was the highest, so the individual performers that, after 2 or 3 generations, what was left over in the cage was 3 rickety looking hens that had pecked everyone else to death, right? And what they realized was the highest individual performers were the highest performers because they suppressed the performers of the other contributors. That's why they were the highest egg layers. Whereas the highest performing cage, so the group performance, over time, they produced 160% more eggs. So what we want as an organization is to maximize group performance, not just reward individual performance. And this is what I see with OKRs. When you do OKRs, what you're really incentivizing is the highest individual performers. Everyone wants to look like I'm the highest performer, and therefore it actually lowers collaboration with the team. So maybe this is a good point to switch to what should you do instead? What do you say? Or is there anything you'd like to delve into before we talk about what do we switch into? Or what do we do instead?
No, there is two things that came to my mind. So this problem of collaboration, because it's a huge problem. They pay huge amounts of money to consultants to go and solve collaboration. That's a big problem. And then there is the other thing that you touch that is more about this intrinsic motivation or the flow. The performance comes when you have autonomy to decide, you are improving, you have a little bit of mastery, and you have meaning to what you do. And of course, in OKR, we don't find that shit.
Exactly right. So, what do I do instead? Because, I've tried the approach of just telling leaders don't use OKRs because it's not driving performance. And I describe all of these problems and leaders go like, well, you're asking me to jump into the abyss of the unknown because, OKRs and goal setting, etc., whatever the methodology is for goal setting, it's the devil I know. What do you propose instead? And for a long time, I didn't have an answer to that until about a year or two ago, where I started trying this new approach. What I do now with teams is instead of goals and targets, I work with teams on setting and solving puzzles. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. And the methodology is called Objectives, Hypotheses, and Learnings. OHLs, Objectives, Hypotheses, and Learnings. The way it works is I use objectives to set a puzzle, not just say some random shit that is, dictated from above. For example, a sales objective would be grow the business, and a key result would be get to X million ARR by the end of the year, right? So that's a typical OKR. Here's what I do instead. With OHLs, I'll set the objective as the market expects us to hit X million by the end of this year, but I see a puzzle ahead of us. And the puzzle I see is sales grew in the last 3 years, but they've stalled. So what is going on? How do we solve this puzzle? And here are some questions that I genuinely don't know the answers to. Is it that the market has shifted and there's something going on that we've not adapted to? Maybe it's that we know how to sell to the early adopters, but we haven't figured out how to sell into the mass market. So maybe there's a sales puzzle we have to solve here. Or maybe there's a product puzzle to solve here. Maybe it is that we knew the needs of the early adopters and we were meeting those needs, but we haven't figured out how to actually address the needs of the mass market, right? So there may be a bunch of different puzzles in here. And as a leadership team, the objective and the puzzle that I set is how do we solve this puzzle? And, the sales team might take a piece of the puzzle, the product team takes a piece of the puzzle, but I invite a discussion so that we can really lay out the puzzle and understand it. So that's one. Second is the muscle for puzzle solving that we need to really build. Right? Because that's what I was saying earlier, that muscle has atrophied when I'm just focused on showing you numbers that look good. I haven't learned how to play detective. So the puzzle solving means asking 3 questions. The first question is, how well did it work? And notice that this is not a binary question of did you or didn't you achieve this target? It's very nuanced, where I'm asking you, how well did it work? And this is where, because it's not a binary question, I'm inviting both the good and the bad numbers. I want you to tell me what is working, what is not, right? Then comes the second question, which is, what did you learn? And this is where I tell teams, don't just spit out numbers at me. Don't tell me weekly active users, time spent on site, bounce rate, blah, blah, blah. That's just a whole bunch of numbers. Take those numbers. You play detective. Talk to me about what is the story? What have you figured out from all of these numbers? What have you learned? So that sparks creative thinking. And then the third question, based on how well it worked and what you learned, what will you try next? Right? So the 3 questions, how well did it work? What have you learned? What will you try next? And so if I take the same sales puzzle, if I'm looking at this as a sales problem, maybe I have a hypothesis. So this is where the hypothesis and learnings come in. The hypothesis I had was, our message was resonating for the early adopters, but for the mass market, this message is totally not resonating. We have to figure out what is the right message. And so the hypothesis is, if we try this new message, we will get better meetings with the decision makers because this message resonates for the mass market that has the following needs. And by the way, to define this hypothesis, I had to go talk to customers and really test a few things, figure out what's working or not, right? So this is the hypothesis. And now I test leading and lagging indicators. The leading indicators might be, am I getting those meetings with decision makers based on this new messaging? And the lagging indicator might be actually, how fast am I closing those deals? So that is my, how well is it working question. And I can look at this and say, okay, this message is working better. I'm starting to see the right meetings. And, I might have some more information about what is working or not, right? The second question then is, what have I learned? So now I'm getting those meetings with those decision makers. I'm seeing that the messaging is resonating with them, but it turns out that they haven't managed to convince their upper level, the decision maker. I'm getting those key meetings, but it turns out there's one more layer that I need to also convince. And here's the following material that would be helpful to convince this next layer. And now the third thing is, what will I try next? Right? And now this is the next thing I will try, where I am going to create a webinar for this next layer. I'm going to create the following easy to share information so that the decision maker will be able to share this. And that's what I will try next. So here's how I would set about solving this sort of a puzzle, right? And I'll give you the example on the product side, if you like, but let's first unpack this. But I can share kind of business results that we've seen from solving these problems in this way. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, I sensed some flavors that you made me think about certain things that I have seen in the past, like the business model canvas. When we create in the entrepreneurial way, in one page, what are we want to achieve? We are putting like 10 million hypotheses that we don't know anything about it because we want to solve a problem, but we believe that we have the solution, but maybe it's not. So you made me think about a mix of business model canvas and the lean startup. This story like of continuous experimentation, that everything is a hypothesis that needs to be validated. So you are building the new wave of process for setting directions is iterative. And maybe now my question is the cycle even more accelerated than with the current OKRs that people does it like once per year, twice per year, or 4 times per year?
Oh, I love this question. Okay, so much to unpack here. Let's first talk about direction and how do you set direction versus, continuous iteration, right? And I'll share some of the dangers that I see with that. And then the second part of the question is, how fast are the cycles? So let's hold on to both questions. And maybe I'll answer the cycles. Sorry, let's start with the direction question, right? One thing that I saw happening with both lean startup as well as agile was people started saying, oh, great, I can do lean startup and agile. I'll just keep iterating. And what ended up happening was this mentality of let's just throw things on the wall and see what sticks. I'll just try things, throw things in the market and see what works. And the mentality comes from Silicon Valley. And this is what Silicon Valley says you should do. But why does this mentality come about? Because it's VCs who have this business model. So venture capitalists have this business model of, I am going to invest in 10 things. Out of these 10 things, I just need one thing to make it big. Everything else can go to shit. And in fact, I want it to fail quickly because I don't want to keep investing in middling startups. So they have this attitude of go big or go home. For the entrepreneur, though, this actually is not advantageous. You don't just want to go big or go home. A lifestyle business, it turns out, is great, even though VCs will dismiss it. So my point is, lean startup takes this approach of, just keep iterating and you'll figure out what works. But this leads to a lot of product diseases that I talk about in my first book, Radical Product Thinking. It leads to diseases like pivotitis, where you pivot from one thing to the next, just all the time. You're pursuing the next shiny object. It leads to the disease I call obsessive sales disorder, where, today this customer asks for this custom feature and you say, yes, let's do it. It's just the next iteration. Let's just try this and then we'll try something else. What we need is much clearer direction. So in the Radical Product Thinking book, I talk about what is a good vision. There is a lack of vision and this sort of let's throw things at the wall and see what sticks because we don't have a clear enough vision. We have bullshit vision statements like being number one in the market or, empowering people to express themselves and therefore creating human progress. That's a bullshit vision because anything can fall under that vision. And so if you hold up any feature, your vision is not acting like a filter. The answer is yes, just do it, right? What you need is a vision that says, what is the problem? Why do you need to solve it? Because maybe you don't. Then you can describe what is the end state you envision, and finally, what is the product that you want to create that will solve this problem. So, in the radical product thinking way, there's a detailed vision statement that's a fill in the blank statement, and I'm going to give you an example of that. So, here's an example. Today, when amateur wine drinkers want to find wines that they're likely to like and learn about wines along the way, they have to pick attractive looking wine labels or find wines that are on sale. This is unacceptable because it leads to so many disappointments, and it's hard to learn about wine in this way. We envision a world where finding wines you like is as easy as finding movies you like on Netflix. We're bringing about this world through a recommendations algorithm that matches wines to your taste and an operational setup that delivers these wines to your door. And this is a radical vision because I hadn't told you anything about the startup that I founded in 2011, sold it in 2014. I hadn't told you anything about the startup, and yet I told you just the vision statement, and hopefully you knew exactly what we were doing and why you were doing it. And so this is clarity of vision that you have. And in the Radical Product Thinking book, I talk about what this means in terms of a strategy so that you can clarify an actionable plan, execution and measurement, etc. But this whole approach, instead of goal setting, where I talk about objectives, hypotheses, and learnings, it helps you take this approach of experimentation, learning, and adaptation so that you can translate this vision into everyday action, right? Because once you have such a vision, you may be wrong on certain things. You will discover those things as you try things out in the market. And this gives you scaffolding so that you can do it very systematically, collaborate in terms of learnings, not just try to prove that, yes, this is the right solution, because, you have to give yourself some space to figure out and discover. And that's what this approach to OHLs does for you.
Now, for the part about the cycles, do we
Yes.
need to go faster?
And thank you for bringing that back up. The cycles part is so important, and that how fast those cycles are depends on your specific problem, right? And what stage you're at. In my particular startup, right, our cycles were pretty fast. And you should expect those cycles are fast in an early stage startup because you're discovering things really quickly. You can try out messaging. The cycle to try out sales messaging can be much faster than, for example, if you're building a whole new manufacturing process. And so what is important is to take this approach of how well did it work? What have I learned? What will I try next? And work with your manager and you figure out like, how fast can you try this next experiment? It might be a matter of a weekly check-in. It might be a matter of, a presentation once a month where you're talking about your project and sharing it with your leadership team and saying, here's, how well it's going, what we've learned, and what we're going to do next. So the cycle depends on the context of your puzzle that you're solving and how you want to share this information.
I can easily imagine this working with certain companies, but not with big ass company. I'm thinking about these S&P 500 companies. I see that they will have a challenge in terms of the culture. In smaller companies like a startup way, that is something that they will get it in 3 seconds and a half. This collaborative approach, this incentive to learn, to find solutions. But in the big companies, they have so many problems already with this collaboration challenge. Ah, what do you think is needed in terms of culture in order to that this goes really smooth?
Yeah, such a great question. And I think this is about uh, how do you overcome resistance, right?
Mm.
Because you're right, in a big company, there's a whole cultural element that we've always done this by setting goals.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you might be a leader listening to this and saying, well, what do I do? Right. And the point in this is, when I've used this in organizations, I don't necessarily go in and say, let's throw out OKRs. We're going to do this new thing instead, because that's proposition. By the way, even in a small company, that proposition sounds scary to leaders. Because, even in a small company, it's like, okay, I don't know if my team has the muscle to actually do this measurement and use this experimentation approach of how well did it work? What have we learned? What are we going to do next? When I don't know that they have this capability, I don't want to abandon OKRs, even in a small company. So, this is the similarity between small and large companies. So, here's the solution: don't abandon OKRs. Whatever your goal setting methodology is, you don't have to start day one by abandoning everything you have. The way you change your culture is slowly. So here's what I do: I introduce this approach to product teams. And I say, whatever OKRs goals we have, let's start to use this for puzzle setting. We've launched this particular feature. Come back to me with measurements on this feature and talk to me about how well did it work? What have you learned? What will you try next? And I did this with a team. It's called at a company called Signal, and Signal Ocean. It's in the maritime industry. And within just a couple of such sessions, it completely changed how people were thinking about those experiments. The way we talked about experiments changed altogether, right? We started talking about experiments even amongst ourselves now in this way of how well did it work? What have we learned? What are we going to do next? Everyone starts to collaborate and starts to offer ideas in this way, in terms of what will we try next? And it's this way of thinking, right? And once we all developed this way of thinking, we started using this in our monthly business review meetings. We started to use this to talk about puzzles that we were solving as a team. What have we learned, and what are we going to do next, and how things are working? So this is how you bring about this cultural shift. So here are some practical things you can do as a leader. Just use this approach for yourself. And there is a free template that I can give you a link to, and you can download the OHLs template. You can use this for an initiative that you've worked on, and you can think about how well did it work, what did you learn, what will you try next. You can even role model this for your whole team and present it in this way, so you can start to shift that mindset. You can get teams to together define the puzzle that they're working on, whatever that puzzle is, whether it's culture, whether it's sales, whether it's a product puzzle that you're working on. An example of a product puzzle is, our current users are tech savvy users that I would describe them as follows. But how do we solve the puzzle of expanding to this other type of user that we're not targeting today, right? That's an example of a puzzle. And then you work with a team to solve the puzzle using how well did it work? What have I learned? What will we do next, right? So those are some practical tips in terms of what you can do.
I have to be sincere, Radhika. The moment where you convince me is when I realize that if people are solving puzzles, this is one of the best incentive for human beings in terms of the human psychology. We are incentivized by this idea of solving challenges is something that is related to the area of flow when we were talking about autonomy, mastery, and meaning. Totally related. So human beings, we are built. This is the top of the pyramid, even in this old Maslow pyramid with self-actualization. We want to solve problems. We don't want to do tasks. How to reach these $10 million OKR? Yes, that's a task. That's not about solving a problem. And that is a good incentive for human beings that goes beyond just these perks, money that you throw. And that gives also a little bit of incentive. And you kind of mentioned it, but not that clearly about this blue ocean strategy, not caring not just about your current users, but who the hell could use your products or your services beyond just your competition. So that's I love that, and you have to give me this template for OHL because I think that is going to be useful for this audience. Absolutely.
I love it. And just your point of what you said in terms of motivation, this is an experiment I try with leaders. Let's do it right here. Just notice your feelings as I ask you the following two questions. So the first question, just notice how you feel. What are your goals for this year?
Hmm.
The second question, what puzzles would you like to solve for the business this year? Do you want to share like how those two questions made you feel?
Um, so repeat again the first question.
What are your goals for this year?
Yes, I had some goals that were related to revenues, and some of them related to learning new skills, personal, me, that come to my mind. Yes. Second question.
What puzzles would you like to solve this year?
It is related to the learning skills because I have put myself for the first time ever to program apps on my own. At 50 years old, I have decided that I wanted to create apps instead of paying someone else to do it, that I need to know how to do it on my own. So that was kind of a challenge, a puzzle that I want to uh, to solve. I have started. It's going good. It's a little bit too slow for my taste, but I want to by the end of the year, I want to be good at that.
So, there are two things that I notice in your answer, right? The second one, automatically, I could hear more passion about it.
Yeah.
The moment you were speaking for longer about what puzzle you want to solve, you were going into much more detail about why you're doing it. Like you started talking about this as a personal thing, your challenge, etc. Whereas when I asked you about goals, your answer sounded like tasks, that you had set these tasks for yourself, right? Like it goes back to just, how we feel about it. Like what I hear is it feels more burdensome when we think about it as goals. Like did you notice that heaviness?
I know. This is, and I even before this interview, I can tell you, I feel like down every time that I think about this first thing, revenues. No, but when I'm doing my thing, I get excited because I successfully program something. And by the way, programming, that means using AI to program, but using it correctly. Uh, but that excites me because I'm learning and I feel like so young. And then I can even make fun of some of my collaborators who take 10 million years to do the same. Exactly.
Exactly, right? But even revenues, we can start to convert it into a puzzle. Like it's not just pursuing revenues, it's more like there's this problem that I want to solve. I want to figure out what is going on in terms of like what is my market? Like what does that market need? Like you start to put a different spin around it. There isn't that same heaviness around goals, right?
Indeed. That's totally. And that's why again I'm asking you in a selfish way. I need your template. I need to tell you if it worked for me or not. Absolutely.
I love it. I love it. We'll definitely share.
One last question. So we getting the buy-in is not easy to change this methodology that some companies have been using for 10 years. Some of them have sorry, invested millions of dollars in a system to do OKRs. The most
Yes.
stupid thing in the world, that you can do it with Excel, by the way. And so they have invested in systems. So how do you convince a leader to embark in this big change? In fact, how do you make it like, what is the argument that you can use so that this guy sees, I need to try it at least?
Ah, I'll I'll share a very quick story of Intel. Um, and so Intel, Andy Grove at Intel, who was the third CEO, he instituted OKRs, right? And John Doerr, when he wrote about OKRs, he credited Andy Grove's success and making Intel the leader in microprocessors at the time, he credited it to OKRs. Whereas if you look at reality, what Walter Isaacson, when he wrote about Andy Grove, what he said made Andy Grove so successful and innovative was Andy Grove's paranoical obsession with never getting complacent and his continuous experimentation and learning. In fact, Andy Grove, when he wrote a book, Only the Paranoid Survive, he talks about the importance of experimentation and learning. And the thing is, right, experimentation to him just came naturally. He had a way of getting everyone in the organization to continuously think about how to experiment. And what Andy Grove says in his book is you have to constantly experiment and learn how to experiment when everything is going well. Because when the market goes to shit, it's too late to then say, now I'm going to build the muscle to experiment, right? By that point, if you haven't built this experimentation muscle, you're going to lose out. And so, as a leader, don't have to throw out anything. You've invested millions in this OKR system, keep the investment, whatever. What made Andy Grove successful is not OKRs, but the experimentation. He still had OKRs. Try to be that next Andy Grove. And the way you're going to get there is by doing experimentation, learning, and adaptation. And the way you do that, Andy Grove had an intuition for it. For you, this framework makes it easier to spread that sort of experimentation, learning, and adaptation intuition across the whole company. You can do this by giving everyone this framework, presenting information in this way yourself, create the whole mindset of this experimentation, learning, and adaptation, where as a leader, you want your whole team on the front lines to give you information in terms of what is actually happening on the ground, right? And that is the real information you need so that you can make strategic decisions. And this is what Andy Grove said in his book. Like, he never shot the messenger. He wanted people to tell him what is actually happening on the ground. Even people who are in Asia, who are very often the culture is it's hierarchical, you never question authority, etc. Even when people from Asia were traveling from Intel's offices there back to headquarters, he wanted to make sure people felt comfortable, that they could tell him what is actually happening, and so that they would make changes. They learned, early enough that the memory business was declining. They experimented with microchips for a decade before that became their big cash cow. This is what we need to do as leaders.
Wow. So this episode, if I have to get a takeaway, is one, I don't know if in English you say it correctly, but if somebody is radical like you, is called in my language punk, a punk like in the 70s, 80s, you have a punk attitude towards innovation, towards I hope that it works in English. This is definitely something to be considered, and I think that we need a big change in how we manage performance. I mean, for years, because at the individual level or in the at the organizational level, we are doing it wrong. The individual is incentivized to cheat the system. I will show you the number that works. The organizations are sometimes cheating the shareholders with saying, I'm showing you the number that works. I don't care if in 1 year I'm alive or not. So something needs to change, and then probably this approach of using OHL, it is the beginning of a beautiful story where we can see more collaboration, more human centricity in the way we solve, because your system is very anchored in human psychology, definitely, Radhika. Thank you very much for spending time with me. How can people reach you to ask you more questions about OHL, to really, maybe they have yeah, they haven't understood the full process, or they just want to give it a shot to start experimenting with themselves.
Yeah, so people can reach out to me on LinkedIn. They can find me Radhika Dutt, and I will share the link for that as well. They can also download the OHL's toolkit. Go to radicalproduct.com and you'll find a link to toolkits, and there's the OHL toolkits, but I will also share a link with you for the audience afterwards. Also, as you use the OHL's toolkit, you can reach out to me and tell me all about your experience. And I'm currently working on that next book about why goals and targets don't work and what to do instead. So if you tell me your story, it might just make it into the book. So you're welcome to share. And also go get the Radical Product Thinking book in the meanwhile, so you can work on a vision and strategy, etc., and use some radical ways to be able to do that.
Thank you, Radhika. It was so lovely to, I don't know, usually I have more resistance to this new idea, especially that you broke my dream of little girl of OKRs in the world. Uh, Anyways, but this time I think I got it. And thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure.